A freezing boy begs to enter a millionaire's mansion on a snowy Christmas Eve, desperate for warmth and safety. The millionaire hesitates, but something about the boy seems hauntingly familiar. When the boy reveals his late mother's name, the millionaire's world is shattered. This isn't just a lost child at his doorstep. He's his long-lost son, hidden away by the very choices he spent a lifetime regretting. But how did the boy end up alone and freezing on the streets? And will this shocking discovery bring redemption or reopen wounds too deep to heal? This unforgettable story will leave you breathless, proving it's never too late for second chances. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The grandfather clock in Charles Whitaker's dining room struck 6, its deep chimes echoing through the empty mansion like a mournful reminder of the passing hours. Outside, snow fell silently against the windows, creating a pristine white blanket that only emphasized the darkness within, each flake adding to the sense of isolation. Charles sat alone at the head of his massive mahogany dining table, his reflection distorted in the polished surface, a ghost of the man he used to be. The feast before him, a perfectly roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, golden potatoes, and all the traditional fixings, remained untouched, a monument to another solitary holiday. Steam had long since stopped rising from the dishes, each one carefully prepared by his household staff who'd departed hours ago for their own family celebrations, leaving behind only the hollow sound of their farewell wishes. Bing Crosby's "I'll Be Home for Christmas" drifted faintly from the kitchen radio, the irony not lost on Charles as he straightened his expensive silk tie for the third time that evening. He'd dressed formally out of habit, though there wasn't a soul around to notice or care about his immaculate appearance. The flames in the grand fireplace cast dancing shadows across the gold-trimmed wallpaper and crystal chandeliers, creating an eerie ballet of light and darkness. Charles picked up his fork, then set it down again with a quiet sigh, his appetite absent. His gaze drifted to the empty chairs surrounding him, 24 of them, each one a reminder of his solitude and the family gatherings that should have been. Taking a deep breath that seemed to catch in his throat, he reached for the crystal decanter and poured himself a generous measure of whiskey. The amber liquid caught the firelight as he swirled it in his glass, memories washing over him like waves against a lonely shore. He saw his children's faces, now grown, the last time they'd sat at this very table. The argument that had driven them away still rang in his ears, every harsh word etched into his memory. His ex-wife's disappointed expression as she'd packed her things, not even looking back as she walked out the door. But most of all, he remembered Lila. Beautiful, gentle Lila with her artist's hands and warm brown eyes that seemed to hold endless compassion. The way she'd looked at him like he could hang the moon, before his father had gotten involved and shattered everything. "She's not our kind, Charles," his father had said with that stern, unyielding voice, and like a coward, Charles had listened, destroying the best thing that had ever happened to him. "To another year of mistakes," he muttered bitterly, raising his glass to the empty room. The whiskey burned going down, but not enough to dull the ache in his chest or silence the regrets that haunted him. A sound cut through the quiet, so faint he almost missed it beneath the crackling of the fire. Charles froze, the glass halfway to his lips. There it was again, a knock at the front door, hesitant but unmistakable. He set down his drink, frowning. The security gate was locked and no one had buzzed for entry. Perhaps it was the wind playing tricks on his guilt-ridden mind. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, demanding to be heard. Charles pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with an almost angry sound. He made his way through the dimly lit hallway to the massive front door, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. When he pulled it open, the bitter December wind rushed in like an uninvited guest, carrying snowflakes that melted on the marble foyer floor. There, illuminated by the porch light, stood a small boy who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. His thin jacket offered little protection against the cold, and his dark skin had taken on an ashen pallor that spoke of hours in the freezing weather. The child's teeth chattered as he looked up at Charles with desperate eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Please, sir," the boy pleaded, his voice trembling like a leaf in the winter wind. "Let me in. I have nowhere else to go." The heavy oak door creaked open, letting in a blast of frigid air that made the hallway's crystal chandelier tinkle and set the shadows dancing on the marble floor. Charles stood frozen, his hand still gripping the brass doorknob, staring at the small figure before him, his breath catching in his throat. The boy couldn't have been more than 12. His thin jacket, dusted with snow and frayed at the edges, did little to shield him from the bitter cold of the December night. His worn sneakers were soaked through, leaving wet prints on the marble steps, and a small puddle was forming where he stood. His dark skin had taken on an ashen pallor from the cold, and his teeth chattered uncontrollably, the sound echoing in the silence of the entryway. "But please, sir," the boy stammered, wrapping his arms tightly around himself, his shoulders hunched against the wind that whipped at his back. "I have nowhere else to go." Charles's jaw tightened, and a familiar wall of suspicion rose in his mind. In his experience, nothing came without a price, and trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Was this some elaborate scheme? A distraction while accomplices waited in the shadows? His eyes scanned the darkness beyond his property's wrought iron gates, searching for any sign of movement in the swirling snow. "Who sent you?" Charles demanded, his voice sharp enough to make the boy flinch. "My mom," the boy whispered, his eyes welling with tears that threatened to spill onto his frost-nipped cheeks. She died last month. But before she did, she made me promise. She said if I was ever in real trouble, I should find Charles Whitaker. She said you'd help me." Something in the boy's voice, a raw desperation that couldn't be faked, made Charles's chest tighten painfully. Still, years of careful distrust weren't easily dismissed, and his fingers drummed nervously against the doorframe. "Your mother's name?" Charles asked, studying the boy's face for any sign of deception, any hint of rehearsal in his words. "Lila," the boy said softly, his voice trembling. "Lila Johnson." The name hit Charles like a physical blow, sending him reeling back a step. He gripped the doorframe to steady himself, memories flooding back unbidden, memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Against his better judgment, Charles stepped aside, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Come in," he said gruffly, "before you freeze to death." The boy hurried inside, his movements stiff from cold, leaving a trail of melting snow in his wake. Charles led him to the living room, where a fire still burned in the massive stone fireplace, casting warm light across the expensive furnishings. The boy immediately moved toward the warmth, holding his trembling hands out to the flames, his shadow stretching long across the oriental rug. "Stay there," Charles ordered, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. He returned moments later with a thick wool blanket and a mug of hot chocolate, steam rising in lazy spirals. The boy accepted both with shaking hands, keeping his eyes downcast as if afraid to make direct contact. "Where did you come from?" Charles asked, maintaining a safe distance, hovering uncertainly between the doorway and the leather armchair. "How did you find me?" The boy wrapped the blanket tighter around his shoulders, burrowing into its warmth. "Mom told me you'd help," was all he would say, his voice barely above a whisper, heavy with exhaustion and something else, something that sounded like hope. Charles watched as violent shivers racked the boy's small frame, each tremor making something twist uncomfortably in his chest. Despite his suspicions, he couldn't ignore the child's obvious distress. The boy looked half-starved, and exhaustion was written in every line of his body, from his drooping shoulders to his heavy-lidded eyes. "You can sleep on the couch tonight," Charles said finally, already second-guessing his decision. He walked to his study, deliberately removing his laptop and locking the door. Old habits die hard. When he returned, the boy had curled up on the leather couch, the blanket pulled up to his chin, his damp shoes placed neatly on the floor beside him. "Thank you," the boy murmured, his eyes already closing with fatigue, his breathing beginning to slow. Charles stood in the doorway, watching as the boy's breathing evened out into sleep, wondering what Lila's son could possibly want from him after all these years. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the boy's face, and for a moment, Charles could see traces of Lila in his features, the same gentle curve of his cheek, the same long eyelashes resting against his skin. The revelation sent a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The dining room's warmth seemed to thaw some of the tension as Charles carefully placed a plate of roast turkey and vegetables in front of Jeremiah. Golden light from the chandelier cast a soft glow over the polished mahogany table. The boy sat rigid in his chair, his eyes darting between the elaborate place settings as if trying to remember which fork to use first, his small frame nearly swallowed by the high-backed dining chair. "Go ahead," Charles said, his voice gentler than before, surprising even himself. "Eat what you'd like. There's plenty more in the kitchen." Jeremiah picked up his fork with trembling fingers and took a small bite. His eyes widened at the taste, and despite his obvious attempt to maintain proper manners, his next few bites came quickly. A small spot of gravy appeared at the corner of his mouth, which he hastily dabbed away with his napkin. Charles cleared his throat, watching the boy eat with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Where is your family? Surely there must be someone. Grandparents, aunts, uncles?" Jeremiah's fork paused halfway to his mouth, a piece of turkey dangling precariously. "It's just me now. My mom ... His voice caught, and he blinked rapidly. "She's gone." "What happened?" Charles asked, trying to keep his tone neutral while his heart hammered against his ribs. "Cancer," Jeremiah said quietly, pushing a piece of potato around his plate, creating abstract patterns in the gravy. "It happened fast. One day she was fine, and then..." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "They sent me to a foster home after, but..." His voice trailed off, and his shoulders hunched slightly as he stared intently at his plate, as if the answers to all his problems might be found in the remains of his dinner. "But what?" Charles prompted, leaning forward slightly. "Mom made me promise something before she died," Jeremiah said, instead of answering, his fingers tightening around the fork. "She told me to find Charles Whitaker. She said you'd take care of me." Charles scoffed lightly, though his stomach clenched. "That must be a coincidence. I don't see how your mother could have..." "Her name was Lila," Jeremiah said softly, the two simple words falling like stones into still water. The wine glass slipped from Charles's suddenly numb fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Red wine spread like spilled paint across the expensive Persian rug, seeping into the delicate fibers. Images flooded his mind. Lila's bright smile on their first date, her laugh echoing through the park where they met in secret, his father's thunderous voice demanding he end things, the tears in her eyes the day he walked away. Each memory struck like a physical blow. "I'm sorry!" Jeremiah jumped up, reaching for a napkin, his face twisted with worry. "I didn't mean to upset you. I can clean it." "No," Charles said, his voice hoarse, barely recognizable as his own. "Stay seated." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like a strangled cry. I need a moment. Excuse me." Charles strode to his study, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house like a man fleeing ghosts. When he returned several minutes later, his face was pale but composed, though his hands still trembled slightly. The words "we need to talk" died on his lips as he saw Jeremiah slumped over the dining table, his head resting on his crossed arms, sound asleep. In sleep, the boy's face had softened, and Charles could see traces of Lila in the curve of his cheek, the sweep of his eyelashes. The study's dim lamplight cast long shadows across Charles's face as he slumped into his leather chair, the worn leather creaking beneath his weight. His hands trembled slightly as he poured another measure of whiskey, the crystal decanter clinking against the glass. The amber liquid caught the light as he swirled it, lost in thought, watching the gentle whirlpool form and fade in the stillness of the evening. From his desk drawer, he pulled out a worn photograph, its corners softened from years of handling. Lila's smile beamed up at him, radiant and full of life, with that hint of mischief he'd always loved. She stood in front of a spring garden bursting with tulips and daffodils, her artist's smock splattered with paint in rainbow hues, dark curls caught in a gentle breeze. Charles ran his thumb across the image, remembering the day he'd taken it, How she'd laughed when he insisted on capturing the moment. How the sunlight had made her eyes sparkle with joy. "I should have fought harder," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, the words hanging heavy in the quiet room. The memories came rushing back, his father's thunderous voice demanding he end things with Lila, the cruel words about maintaining the family's reputation, the way Charles had crumbled under the pressure like a house of cards. The shame of his weakness still burned after all these years. He took another sip of whiskey, letting it burn down his throat, hoping it might dull the sharp edges of regret. Could Jeremiah be his son? The timing aligned perfectly. The boy looked about 12, with those familiar expressive eyes that reminded him so much of Lila's, and his relationship with her had ended 13 years ago. But why hadn't she told him? His chest tightened at the thought of her facing pregnancy and motherhood alone, struggling through doctor's appointments and sleepless nights without support, while he'd been living in comfort, blind to her struggles. Charles pulled out a small wooden box from the bottom drawer, its cherry wood surface smooth from years of handling. Inside, among ticket stubs and dried flowers from their dates, lay an envelope with Lila's distinctive handwriting, each loop and curve as graceful as she had been. He'd never had the courage to open it when it arrived years ago, too afraid of the truth it might contain. Now he held it in his hands, feeling the weight of unspoken words within, his fingers tracing the edge of the seal. His heart pounded as he contemplated opening it, but after a moment's hesitation, he placed it back in the box, unopened, unable to face its contents just yet. Grabbing a notepad, his fountain pen poised above the paper, he began jotting down questions, his handwriting unsteady. "Where did you grow up? What did your mother tell you about your father?" The morning sun filtered through the kitchen's tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble countertops. A thin layer of frost decorated the corners of the glass panes, creating delicate patterns that caught the light. Charles padded into the kitchen in his navy robe and leather slippers, then stopped short. Jeremiah sat at the kitchen table, already dressed in yesterday's wrinkled clothes, hunched over a sketchbook. A steaming cup of tea sat beside him, wisps of vapor curling into the cool morning air. The boy's pencil moved with confident strokes across the paper, his hand steady and sure. Charles watched silently from the doorway, impressed by the detailed sketch of his snow-covered mansion taking shape on the page. Every brick and window was carefully rendered, showing remarkable attention to detail. "Did you sleep well?" Charles asked, keeping his voice gentle, not wanting to startle the boy. Jeremiah nodded without looking up, his shoulders relaxing slightly at the familiar question. "Yes, sir. Thank you." Charles poured himself a cup of coffee from the machine he'd set the night before, and sat down across from the boy. The rich aroma helped clear the morning fog from his mind. "That's quite good," he said, gesturing to the drawing. "You have real talent." "My mom taught me," Jeremiah said softly, his voice carrying a hint of pride mixed with sadness. His pencil paused mid-stroke. "She was an artist too." Charles's heart clenched at the mention of Lila. He cleared his throat, fighting back the wave of memories. "Tell me about what happened, before you came here." Jeremiah's shoulders tensed visibly. He set down his pencil with careful precision and wrapped his hands around his tea mug, seeking its warmth. "After Mom died, they put me in a foster home. The parents, they weren't nice. They'd yell a lot, call me names. Sometimes they'd forget to make dinner." His voice grew quieter, almost inaudible. "I ran away 3 weeks ago. Been staying at shelters when I could, but..." He shrugged, the gesture making him seem smaller in his oversized chair. "And your mother," Charles said carefully, studying the boy's face. "She told you to find me." It was the last thing she said. Jeremiah's eyes welled with tears, though he blinked them back bravely. "She made me promise. Said you'd help me if I ever needed it." Charles stared into his coffee, wrestling with doubt and old regrets. The dark liquid reflected his troubled expression. Could this really be his son? The timing fit, but why hadn't Lila told him? And what right did he have to help this boy after abandoning Lila all those years ago? "You can stay," he found himself saying, surprising even himself with the certainty in his voice. "For a few days at least, while I figure things out." Relief flooded Jeremiah's face, softening his guarded expression. "Thank you, sir." Charles stood and walked to a closet near the kitchen, his slippers whispering against the hardwood floor. He returned with a thick winter coat and sturdy boots. "These belong to my son. They might fit you." Jeremiah accepted them hesitantly, running his fingers over the expensive wool coat as if afraid it might disappear. "Are you sure?" Charles nodded, something tightening in his chest at the boy's careful handling of the clothes. "I need some time to sort through all this. But you're safe here for now." "Okay," Jeremiah whispered. He gathered his sketchbook and new clothes, holding them close to his chest, then padded back to the living room. Soon he was curled up in an armchair by the fireplace, pencil moving across paper once again, the warm glow of the flames highlighting his focused expression. Charles watched from the kitchen doorway, coffee cooling forgotten in his hand, Lila's final words echoing in his mind. Find Charles Whitaker. He'd never felt more uncertain about what to do next, yet something about the boy's presence felt undeniably right. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the study's tall windows, casting a warm glow on the mahogany desk where Charles sat. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted an old wooden box from the bottom drawer, its brass hinges creaking in protest. The box held memories he'd tried to forget, ticket stubs from concerts they'd attended together, dried flowers from their last Valentine's Day, and a stack of unopened envelopes tied with a faded blue ribbon. Charles recognized Lila's elegant handwriting immediately, each curve and loop as familiar as his own signature. The earliest letters were postmarked just weeks after he'd ended their relationship, the stamps now faded and corners worn soft. His throat tightened as he picked up the first envelope, its paper yellowed with age, crackling beneath his fingers. "Dear Charles," the letter began. "I don't understand why you left. Was your father's approval worth throwing away what we had? I loved you with all my heart. Your silence hurts more than any words could. Each day I wait by the phone, hoping—" Charles put down the letter, his vision blurring. The weight of her pain pressed against his chest like a stone. He picked up another envelope, this one dated 5 years later, the paper slightly crisper. "I've tried to reach you so many times," Lila had written. "There's something you need to know about our son Jeremiah. He's growing so fast and he reminds me of you every day. He has your smile, your quiet way of thinking. Sometimes when he's lost in thought, I see you in every gesture." Hot tears splashed onto the paper, creating dark circles on the aged surface. Charles wiped his eyes roughly with his sleeve, the expensive fabric harsh against his skin. More letters spilled from the box, years of attempts to connect, to share their son's life with him. Each envelope told another story he should have known. At the bottom of the stack, he found a photograph, its edges slightly bent. Lila sitting on a park bench, her arm around a young boy with Charles's eyes and determined expression. Her smile was tired but genuine, her love for their son evident in every detail. Anger surged through him, not at Lila but at himself. The emotion burned in his chest like acid. While she struggled to raise their son alone, he'd been hiding behind his wealth and his father's prejudices, building empty fortunes instead of the family he should have treasured. He thought of all the birthdays he'd missed, all the times Jeremiah might have needed a father's guidance or comfort. Charles spread the letters across his desk, creating a timeline of the life he should have known about. His fingers traced each postmark, each careful fold. Each envelope revealed another piece of their story: Jeremiah's first words, his love for drawing, his questions about his father. The boy's artwork evolved through the years, from stick figures to increasingly detailed sketches that showed real talent. "I'm so sorry, Lila," he whispered, carefully placing the letters back in the box. His voice cracked with emotion. "I won't fail you again. I promise." Sunlight filtered through the bay window, casting a soft glow on Jeremiah as he sat cross-legged on the window seat, his shoulders hunched in concentration. His pencil moved steadily across the paper while snow drifted down outside, coating the grounds in pristine white. The winter afternoon cast long shadows across the lawn, making the scene even more striking. Charles paused in the doorway, watching the boy's intense focus, reminded of how Lila used to get lost in her own artwork. "May I see what you're drawing?" Charles asked quietly, taking a few careful steps into the room, not wanting to startle the boy. Jeremiah's hand stilled, hovering above the paper. He glanced up nervously, then back at his sketch, his fingers tightening slightly around the pencil. After a moment's hesitation, he turned the sketchbook around, biting his lower lip. Charles's breath caught. The drawing captured every detail of the mansion's snow-covered exterior, from the intricate Victorian trim to the way icicles hung from the eaves like crystal daggers. Even the texture of the old brick showed through the careful shading, and the bare branches of the oak trees seemed to dance against the winter sky. "This is remarkable," Charles said, genuinely impressed by the skill and attention to detail. "You have a real gift." A tiny smile tugged at Jeremiah's lips, brightening his whole face. "Mom always said that too. She'd save up to buy me pencils, even when things were tight. Sometimes she'd skip lunch at work just to get me a new set. Do you want to be an artist when you grow up?" Jeremiah nodded, his eyes lighting up with passion. "That's my dream. Mom used to say dreams don't cost anything. She said they were the one thing nobody could take away from you." Charles felt a familiar pang of guilt, thinking of all the years Lila had struggled while he lived in luxury, surrounded by everything money could buy. He cleared his throat, fighting back emotion. "Wait here a moment." He returned carrying a leather case and a thick sketchbook, both still wrapped in their original packaging. "These belong to my son, but he never used them. I think they should go to someone who will appreciate them properly." Jeremiah's eyes widened as he opened the case, revealing a set of professional drawing pencils in every grade imaginable. Are you sure?" "Absolutely." Charles sat down nearby, keeping a respectful distance. "Tell me more about your art. What do you like to draw most?" "Landscapes mostly, and sometimes people." Jeremiah's voice grew stronger as he talked about his passion, his earlier shyness melting away. "Mom was my favorite subject. She'd pose for me while doing dishes or reading. She always made things feel okay even when we didn't have much. She had the best smile." Charles listened intently, treasuring these glimpses of the life he should have shared, each word both a gift and a reminder of his failures. "There's an art museum downtown," he said carefully, watching Jeremiah's reaction. "Would you like to visit it tomorrow?" Jeremiah looked up, surprise and cautious hope dancing in his eyes. "Really?" "Really, we could make a day of it. They have a special exhibit on American landscapes right now." A genuine smile spread across Jeremiah's face, the first Charles had seen since the boy arrived. "I'd like that," he said softly, already turning to a fresh page in his new sketchbook, his fingers running reverently over the pristine paper. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble floors as Mrs. Peterson, Charles' housekeeper of 15 years, let herself in through the service entrance. Her sensible shoes clicked against the polished stone as she carried her usual cleaning supplies, expecting another quiet day in the mansion. Instead, she froze at the sight of a young black boy sitting in the living room, absorbed in his sketching, his pencil moving with careful concentration across the paper. Jeremiah looked up briefly, offering a small nod before returning to his drawing. Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened, but she managed a polite smile and hurried to the kitchen, her heart racing with surprise and curiosity. Through the window she spotted Mr. Jenkins, the gardener, trimming the hedges in his worn overalls. She tapped frantically on the glass to get his attention, leaving fingerprints on the spotless surface. "Did you see?" she whispered when he came inside, wiping his weathered hands on a cloth. "There's a boy staying here, a young black child." Mr. Jenkins raised his eyebrows, leaning on his garden shears. "In Mr. Whitaker's house? Are you sure?" Clear as day, sitting right there in the living room like he belongs, drawing pictures and everything. Within hours, the news spread through the staff like wildfire, each retelling adding new details and speculation. The cook called her sister, who worked for the neighbors, sharing the gossip over her lunch break. The chauffeur mentioned it to the grocery delivery man while unloading boxes. By evening, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with speculation, phones ringing and text messages flying. "I heard he's Whitaker's secret son," whispered the neighbor's maid over coffee. "From some affair years ago." No, countered the mailman, adjusting his heavy bag. "It's probably some charity case. Good publicity for his company. You know how these rich folks operate." Charles was reviewing documents in his study, his reading glasses perched on his nose, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Bernard Matthews, a senior board member and longtime thorn in his side. "Charles?" Bernard's voice oozed false concern. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "What can I do for you, Bernard?" Charles's voice was cool and professional. "Well, there are some rumors circulating about a young guest in your home. People are talking." Charles's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the phone harder. "My personal life is not up for discussion." Of course, but you understand our concern about anything that might affect the company's image?" "Good night, Bernard." Charles cut him off, hanging up the phone with more force than necessary. His hands shook slightly as he poured himself a drink, the amber liquid sloshing against the crystal glass. When he went to check on Jeremiah, he found the boy sitting quietly with his sketchbook, but there was worry in his eyes, a tension in his small shoulders. "Is everything okay?" Jeremiah asked softly. His pencil paused mid-stroke. Charles forced a smile, trying to hide his anger and concern. "Everything's fine. Just some work calls." Later that night, as Charles tucked Jeremiah into bed, smoothing the covers around him, he watched the boy's peaceful, sleeping face. The whispers and judgments of others seemed to fade away in the quiet moment, replaced by a fierce determination. "They can talk all they want," he whispered to himself, gently brushing a strand of hair from Jeremiah's forehead. "I won't let them ruin this." The winter sun streamed through the mansion's tall windows as Jeremiah adjusted his new coat, running his fingers over the soft wool. The warmth felt foreign but welcome after weeks of bitter cold. His sketchbook clutched tightly to his chest, he stood nervously by the front door, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he waited. "Ready?" Charles asked, grabbing his car keys from the silver dish on the entryway table. "The museum has one of the finest collections in the state. I think you'll especially enjoy their modern wing." Jeremiah nodded silently, following Charles to his luxury sedan parked in the circular driveway, its black paint gleaming in the morning light. At the museum entrance, Jeremiah's steps faltered. The building loomed before them, its marble columns stretching toward the sky like ancient giants. Well-dressed visitors streamed past, their designer clothes and confident strides making Jeremiah shrink further into his coat, his fingers nervously working the buttons. "I don't know if I should," he mumbled, staring down at his shoes. Charles placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, squeezing softly. "Art isn't just for rich people, Jeremiah. It's for everyone who wants to see beauty in the world. That includes you." Inside, Jeremiah's eyes widened at the vast galleries, their walls adorned with countless masterpieces. His nervousness melted away as they wandered past painting after painting. He stopped at each one, studying the brushstrokes and colors with intense focus, his face inches from the canvas until the security guards cleared their throats. His pencil flew across his sketchbook, capturing quick impressions of what moved him most, his hand sure and steady. They paused before a large portrait of a mother holding her young son. The woman's eyes held such tenderness that Jeremiah's breath caught in his throat. The painting seemed to glow from within, capturing a moment of pure love between parent and child. "Mom used to sit with me while I drew," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Even after long shifts at work, she'd look at every sketch and tell me I could be anything I wanted." His voice cracked slightly and he swallowed hard. "Sometimes she'd save up for weeks just to buy me new pencils. She'd wrap them in newspaper to make them feel special." Charles felt his chest tighten with guilt, but kept silent, watching Jeremiah trace the outline of the portrait in his book with careful, reverent strokes. As they explored further, Jeremiah grew more animated. his earlier shyness forgotten in his excitement. "How did they get the light to look like that?" he asked, pointing to a landscape where sunbeams broke through storm clouds. "And those shadows, they're so real, like you could reach out and touch them." Charles explained what he knew about technique and composition, delighting in Jeremiah's eager questions and bright eyes. In the gift shop, he picked up a heavy art book filled with famous works and techniques, its pages glossy and thick with color reproductions. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Jeremiah, whose arms dropped slightly under its weight. The boy's face lit up like a sunrise. "Really? Thank you, Mr. Whitaker." As they headed toward the exit, two elderly women in fur coats whispered loudly behind them, their voices carrying in the marble hallway. "That must be the Whitaker boy everyone's talking about," one murmured with barely concealed disdain. "Such a scandal." Charles felt his jaw clench but kept walking, his hand protectively on Jeremiah's shoulder as they stepped out into the winter afternoon, leaving the whispers behind in the shadows of the great hall. The boardroom's mahogany table gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights as Charles straightened his tie. 12 pairs of eyes watched him intently, their expressions a mix of concern and judgment. Richard Palmer, the senior board member, cleared his throat. "Charles, we need to address the elephant in the room. These rumors about you harboring a young boy at your residence." Charles's jaw tightened. "My personal life isn't relevant to this meeting." "With all due respect," Richard continued, his voice carefully measured, "everything a CEO does reflects on the company. Our shareholders are asking questions." Another board member, Sarah Chen, leaned forward. "Perhaps a simple statement could clear things up." "Clear what up exactly?" Charles's voice rose slightly. "That I'm helping a child in need? That shouldn't require explanation." The room fell silent. Charles noticed the subtle exchanges of glances, the slight shifting in chairs. It reminded him painfully of his father's country club meetings, where similar looks had been exchanged when Lila's name came up. "Charles," Richard said softly, "we're thinking of the company's image. The circumstances are unusual." "The circumstances," Charles repeated, his tone sharp, "are that a 12-year-old boy needed help. That's all anyone needs to know." Several board members nodded in apparent support, but others stared at their notepads, avoiding eye contact. The prejudice hung in the air like a heavy fog. "We suggest releasing a brief statement," Richard pressed. "Something to control the narrative." Charles stood up, straightening his jacket. "There will be no statement. My personal life is my business. Now, shall we discuss the quarterly projections?" After the meeting, Charles sat in his office, running his hands through his gray hair. The walls felt closer than usual, the weight of judgment pressing in. He thought about Jeremiah, wondering how to shield him from this growing scrutiny. When he arrived home that evening, he found Jeremiah in his usual spot by the fireplace. The boy's pencil moved smoothly across the paper, creating gentle shadows and lines. He glanced up briefly, noting Charles's tense expression, but remained silent. Charles loosened his tie, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. For now, he'd keep these troubles to himself. Jeremiah had faced enough hardship already. Charles watched the boy sketch, finding a measure of peace in the simple, rhythmic motion of the pencil. Slowly, the tension in his shoulders eased. "How's the drawing coming along?" Charles asked gently, breaking the silence. Jeremiah looked up, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's almost done. Just adding the final touches." Charles nodded, feeling a surge of pride. "Your mother would be so proud of you." Jeremiah's smile widened, and for a moment the troubles of the day faded away. They sat together, the warmth of the fire wrapping around them both, offering a brief respite from the world outside. Jeremiah sat at the kitchen table, spooning cereal into his mouth while his pencil moved across the paper of his sketchbook. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on his focused face, highlighting the slight furrow in his brow as he concentrated. The gentle scratching of pencil on paper filled the quiet morning air. The sound of footsteps made him look up. Charles walked in wearing a rare smile that transformed his entire face. His usual stern expression had softened, and there was an energy in his step that Jeremiah hadn't seen before. Even his shoulders seemed lighter, less burdened by the invisible weight they usually carried. "Good morning," Charles said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. The rich aroma filled the kitchen as steam curled up from the mug. "I have something to show you when you're finished eating." Jeremiah's spoon paused halfway to his mouth, milk dripping back into the bowl. "What is it?" "A surprise. Take your time with breakfast." Charles sipped his coffee, trying to hide his growing smile. Jeremiah quickly finished his cereal, curiosity getting the better of him. The spoon clinked against the empty bowl as he set it down. Charles led him upstairs, past several closed doors, their footsteps echoing in the hallway until they reached the end. Charles stopped at a door and turned to Jeremiah, his eyes twinkling with anticipation. "Close your eyes," he said gently. Jeremiah hesitated but complied, his eyelids fluttering shut. He heard the door open with a soft creak and felt Charles's warm hand on his shoulder, guiding him forward. The carpet was plush beneath his feet as he took careful steps. "Okay, open them." Jeremiah's eyes widened, his mouth forming a small O of surprise. The room before him was transformed. Soft blue walls reminded him of summer skies, freshly painted and perfect. A large wooden desk sat beneath a window that overlooked the backyard, its surface clean and waiting. But what made his breath catch were the art supplies. They were everywhere. Pristine canvases leaned against one wall, their white surfaces full of possibility. Brushes of every size stood in ceramic holders, their handles gleaming. Paint sets, both watercolor and acrylic, were arranged neatly on shelves, their colors promising endless creative adventures. A professional drawing table stood in one corner, complete with an adjustable lamp that curved like a graceful swan's neck. Jeremiah stood frozen, his fingers twitching at his sides like small birds wanting to take flight. He took a tentative step forward and reached out to touch a brush, then pulled back, as if afraid it might disappear. "It's okay," Charles said softly, his voice gentle and encouraging. "Everything here is yours." Jeremiah's hand shook as he finally picked up a brush, running his fingers over the soft bristles. "Really?" His voice quivered with emotion. Charles moved to stand beside him, close but not crowding. "You deserve a space where you can create, just like any other child. I know I wasn't there before, but I'm trying to make up for lost time." He paused, his voice growing quieter, more vulnerable. "I hope you can feel at home here." Jeremiah walked slowly around the room, taking everything in with wonder-filled eyes. He opened drawers filled with pencils, charcoal, and pastels, each one perfectly organized. Each discovery made his eyes shine brighter, like stars coming out at dusk. With careful movements, he began organizing the supplies, placing them just so, as if arranging his most precious possessions. His fingers traced each item reverently. Charles watched from the doorway as Jeremiah settled at the desk, his small frame fitting perfectly in the chair. The boy pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, crisp and white, and selected a pencil from the new collection. As he began to sketch, a small smile spread across his face. The first real smile Charles had seen since Jeremiah arrived. It transformed his whole expression, making him look his age for once instead of the too serious child he usually was. Without looking up from his drawing, Jeremiah spoke softly, his voice barely above a whisper but filled with genuine emotion. "Thank you." Charles nodded, feeling something warm bloom in his chest, spreading through his entire body like sunshine. Those two simple words carried more weight than any business deal he'd ever closed, more value than any contract he'd signed. In that moment, watching his son begin to truly settle into his new home, Charles felt a piece of his own heart heal. Charles sat at his mahogany desk, shuffling through financial reports when his housekeeper, Mrs. Bennett, knocked on the study door. Her face was pinched with worry as she handed him a glossy magazine, her usually steady hands trembling slightly. "Sir, I thought you should see this right away." The headline made his stomach drop. Charles Whitaker's Secret Child, The Truth Behind the Mystery Boy. Below it was a grainy photo of him and Jeremiah leaving the art museum, their faces clearly visible despite the poor quality of the shot. Charles's hands tightened on the magazine as he read, his knuckles turning white. The article was filled with wild speculation and thinly veiled racism. They called Jeremiah his hidden son and questioned whether this was a publicity stunt gone wrong. Each word felt like a personal attack, not just on him, but on the innocent boy he'd grown to care for. "Sir," Mrs. Bennet said quietly, wringing her hands. "Reporters have been calling all morning. They want statements about the boy. Some of them are quite persistent." Charles's phone buzzed again, another board member demanding explanations. He rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on, the familiar tension spreading across his forehead like a steel band. Just then, Jeremiah poked his head into the study, holding a new sketch he wanted to show Charles. His eyes were bright with excitement as he approached the desk, but his elbow caught a stack of important documents, sending them fluttering to the floor like autumn leaves. "I'm sorry." Jeremiah quickly bent to gather the papers, his small hands scrambling to collect them. "Can't you be more careful?" Charles snapped, his voice sharp with stress. "These are important documents." Jeremiah froze, his eyes wide with hurt, like a wounded animal. The sketch paper crumpled in his trembling hands as he backed away, shoulders hunched. I'm sorry," he whispered before fleeing the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Charles slumped in his chair, immediately regretting his outburst. The boy had done nothing wrong. He was just excited to share his art, something that brought them both joy. After a few deep breaths, Charles realized he was becoming exactly what he'd promised himself he wouldn't be. Another adult who'd let Jeremiah down, another person who'd hurt him instead of helping. His phone rang again. This time it was Richard from the board insisting they needed to get ahead of this story and control the narrative. "No statement," Charles said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I won't expose Jeremiah to that circus. He's been through enough." Later that evening, Charles knocked softly on Jeremiah's door. The boy sat cross-legged on his bed, sketching with quick, nervous strokes, his pencil moving across the paper like he was trying to escape into his art. "I'm sorry I yelled earlier," Charles said, sitting on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. "I was stressed about work, but that's no excuse. You didn't deserve that." "It's okay," Jeremiah mumbled, not looking up, his fingers tight around his pencil. "No, it's not okay." Charles touched Jeremiah's shoulder gently, feeling the tension in the boy's small frame. "I promise you, no matter what anyone says or writes about us, I'll protect you. You're safe here, that's what matters most to me now." Jeremiah nodded slightly, but Charles could see uncertainty lingering in his eyes, a reminder that trust, once shaken, takes time to rebuild. The study was quiet except for the soft rustling of paper as Charles opened another of Lila's letters with trembling hands. The desk lamp cast a warm glow over the yellowed envelopes, each one containing pieces of a past he'd tried so desperately to forget. The scent of aged paper filled his nostrils, bringing back memories he'd buried deep inside. "Dearest Charles," one letter began, "working 2 jobs barely covers our rent, but Jeremiah needs new shoes again. He's growing so fast." Charles's throat tightened as he read about Lila's struggles to find work, his heart aching with each word. "Some places won't even look at my application when they see my name or the color of my skin. But I keep trying, for our boy. He deserves so much more than what I can give him right now." Another letter revealed her initial attempts to reach him after Jeremiah's birth. "I called your office 3 times, Lila wrote, her pain evident in every carefully penned word. "Each time your secretary said you were unavailable. I knew then that your father's influence was still too strong. I couldn't bear another rejection. The thought of hearing no one more time would have broken me completely." Charles's eyes blurred with tears as he opened the final letter, dated just months before Lila's death. The handwriting was shakier, but the words cut deep into his soul. "I should have told Jeremiah about you sooner. Maybe things would be different, but I'm running out of time and he needs someone. He needs his father. I pray you'll be braver than you were with me. Please don't let our son face this world alone." Setting the letter down with shaking fingers, Charles pulled out an old photo album from his desk drawer. There she was, young, beautiful, and full of life. In one picture, Lila smiled at the camera while Charles kissed her cheek, her eyes sparkling with joy. They looked so happy, so in love. He'd thrown it all away because he was too weak to stand up to his father's racism, too afraid to fight for what really mattered. "I was a coward," he whispered, touching the photograph, tracing the outline of her face with his fingertip. "You faced everything alone while I hid behind my privilege and wealth. How did I let this happen?" Taking a pen and paper, Charles wrote himself a note, pressing so hard the ink nearly tore through. "Fix this. Be better. For Jeremiah. For Lila." He stared at the words until they burned into his memory, a promise he couldn't break. Gathering the letters carefully, Charles walked to Jeremiah's room, his footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. The boy was asleep, his latest sketch still clutched in his hand, a drawing of a woman who could only be Lila. Charles quietly opened the drawer of the bedside table and placed the letters inside, where they belonged. "I won't let you down again, Lila," he whispered before slipping out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar to let in a sliver of hallway light. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Charles flipped pancakes on the griddle, trying to perfect the golden brown circles his son loved so much. He glanced at Jeremiah, who sat cross-legged in the living room absorbed in his sketchbook, his pencil moving in swift, sure strokes across the paper. For a moment, everything felt peaceful, just as Charles had imagined family life could be. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps that made Jeremiah's pencil freeze mid-stroke, leaving an unfinished line hanging in the air. Charles saw the boy's shoulders tense, his whole body going still like a startled deer, as he set down the spatula with a quiet sigh and walked to the door. A woman stood on the doorstep, her face tight with anger, hands clenched at her sides. "Where is he?" she demanded, pushing past Charles into the foyer, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. "Where's my nephew?" "Excuse me, who are you?" Charles asked, though he already suspected the answer, his stomach knotting with dread. "I'm Marcia Reed, Lila's sister." Her voice rose with each word, bouncing off the high ceilings. "And I want to know what gives you the right to take in Jeremiah without saying a word to his family." Charles held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Ms. Reed, please. Jeremiah came to me." "Oh, that's rich," Marcia cut him off, her eyes blazing with years of pent-up fury. "You abandoned Lila when she needed you most, and now you're playing savior to ease your guilty conscience?" From the living room, Jeremiah's face fell as he listened to their voices echo through the mansion, his fingers nervously tracing the edge of his sketchbook. "I know I made mistakes," Charles said quietly, fighting to keep his voice level. "But Jeremiah showed up at my door on Christmas Eve. What was I supposed to do?" "Call his legal guardian, for starters." Marcia's eyes flashed dangerously. "I've been searching for him since he ran from that foster home. Do you have any idea what I've been through since Lila died? Trying to get custody, fighting the system, lying awake at night wondering if he was safe?" Charles tried again, stepping forward. "I understand you're upset." "You understand nothing," Marcia spat, jabbing a finger at his chest. "You weren't there when Lila got sick. You weren't there when she could barely afford medicine. And now you think you can just step in and play father?" Jeremiah hugged his sketchbook to his chest, shrinking deeper into the couch cushions, making himself as small as possible against the growing storm of adult voices. "He needs to come with me," Marcia declared, her tone brooking no argument. "Today?" "That's not happening," Charles said firmly, drawing himself up to his full height. "We need to discuss this properly. Think about what's best for Jeremiah." "What's best?" Marcia laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and cutting. "I'll tell you what's going to happen. Either you hand him over or I'll get lawyers involved. You're not the only one with resources, Mr. Whitaker." She turned on her heel, storming toward the door, her whole body radiating fury. "This isn't over," she called over her shoulder. The door slammed behind her, making the chandelier crystals tinkle like wind chimes in a storm. In the sudden silence, Charles heard the soft click of Jeremiah's bedroom door closing. a sound that felt like a physical pain in his chest. He stood in the hallway, the smell of burning pancakes drifting from the kitchen, as their fragile peace crumbled around him like a house of cards in a bitter wind. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jeremiah's bedroom floor. He sat perched on the window seat, his usually active hands still in his lap. His sketchbook lay unopened beside him, gathering dust for the first time since Christmas Eve. Outside, winter birds fluttered between bare branches, but Jeremiah barely noticed them. The world beyond his window seemed distant and gray, matching his mood. A gentle knock echoed through the room. "Jeremiah?" Charles's voice was soft, tentative. "May I come in?" "Sure," Jeremiah mumbled, not turning from the window. His shoulders tensed slightly at the interruption. Charles entered, his footsteps hesitant on the carpeted floor. The silence between them felt heavy, loaded with unspoken words. "I thought maybe we could talk about what happened this morning, about what Marcia said." Jeremiah shrugged, his eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the glass. His reflection showed a face too serious for someone so young. "Nothing to talk about." "There is," Charles insisted gently. "I saw how her words affected you. The way you shut down during breakfast." "I'm used to it." Jeremiah's voice was barely above a whisper, each word carrying the weight of past rejections. "Being unwanted, passed around. It's fine." Charles felt those words like a physical blow. He sat on the edge of Jeremiah's bed, maintaining a careful distance, fighting the urge to rush over and embrace the boy. "You're not unwanted here. You're not a burden. This is your home now." "Right." Jeremiah's tone was flat, disbelieving. He finally turned to look at Charles, his eyes carrying a weight no 12-year-old should bear. The pain in them was raw, unfiltered. "That's what they all say at first." Over the next few hours, Charles watched helplessly as Jeremiah withdrew further into himself. When lunchtime came, the boy claimed he wasn't hungry, though his stomach growled audibly. The afternoon stretched on, and the usual sounds of pencil scratching against paper were noticeably absent, leaving an uncomfortable silence in their wake. Later, Charles passed by Jeremiah's room and caught a glimpse of the boy quietly folding clothes into a small pile, his movements mechanical and resigned. His heart sank when he realized Jeremiah was preparing to leave before Marcia could force him to go. The sight made Charles' chest ache with a familiar guilt. Charles tried leaving new colored pencils outside Jeremiah's door. They remained untouched, a silent rejection that spoke volumes. He considered calling Marcia, trying to work something out, but feared it would only make things worse. The situation felt like walking on eggshells. That evening, Charles noticed Jeremiah writing in a small, worn journal, something he hadn't seen the boy do before. The pages looked well used, filled with what appeared to be tiny, cramped writing. When their eyes met briefly across the hallway, Jeremiah quickly closed it and turned away, clutching the journal protectively to his chest. Charles stood in his study looking at an old photograph of Lila. Her smile seemed to hold both reproach and encouragement. An idea formed in his mind. Perhaps visiting her grave could help heal this growing rift between them. He picked up the photo, his decision made, hoping this wasn't another mistake. "Jeremiah," he called softly, walking toward the boy's room. His heart hammered with uncertainty. "There's somewhere I'd like to take you tomorrow." The morning air felt heavy as Charles drove through the iron gates of Oakwood Cemetery. Beside him, Jeremiah sat quietly, his small hands clutching a bouquet of white lilies. Raindrops tapped against the windshield in a gentle rhythm, matching the solemn mood inside the car. The wipers squeaked softly as they pushed away the gathering moisture, creating brief moments of clarity before the rain blurred their view again. They walked together through rows of headstones until they reached Lila's grave. The simple marble marker stood beneath an old oak tree, its surface already collecting tiny beads of rain. Faded flowers from previous visitors lay scattered around the base, their petals turned brown and brittle with time. A small ceramic angel, weather-worn but still intact, kept watch from the corner. Jeremiah knelt beside the headstone, his fingers tracing the engraved letters of his mother's name. Charles hung back, his throat tight with emotion, as he watched the boy's gentle movements. The sound of distant traffic seemed to fade away, leaving only the soft patter of rain on leaves above them. After several moments, Charles found the courage to kneel beside Jeremiah. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Lila, I'm so sorry. I was a coward when you needed me to be brave. I let my father's prejudices control my choices, and you paid the price for my weakness." His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, fighting against the weight of years of regret. Tears mixed with rain on Charles's cheeks. "I promise you I'll do better now. No matter what anyone says or does, I'll be there for our son." The words felt like a sacred vow, carried away by the misty morning air. Jeremiah's shoulders began to shake. "I miss her so much," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Every single day." He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "The Foster family. They didn't want me. They made that clear. And now Aunt Marcia—" He stopped, unable to continue, his breath coming in small hitches. Charles placed a gentle hand on Jeremiah's shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere, son. Not this time." He could feel the boy's slight trembling beneath his palm. "Mom always told me stories about how kind you were," Jeremiah said softly. "She said you used to draw with her in the park. She never stopped believing you were good inside." His fingers played with the edge of his jacket, a nervous habit Charles was beginning to recognize. "She was the strongest person I've ever known," Charles replied. "Even when life was unfair, she kept going. She kept loving." His voice grew thick with memories of summer afternoons and shared sketches, of dreams left unfinished. They placed the fresh lilies on the grave, arranging them carefully against the stone. As they stood together, the rain began to ease, and the tension between them seemed to lift slightly. A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, catching the raindrops on the flowers and making them sparkle. Walking back to the car, Jeremiah stopped suddenly. "Did you mean what you said?" he asked, his voice small but steady. "About staying?" His dark eyes searched Charles's face for any sign of uncertainty. Charles turned to face him, meeting his eyes directly. "With all my heart." The words rang with quiet conviction in the damp morning air. A tiny smile tugged at the corner of Jeremiah's mouth as he nodded, the first glimpse of hope returning to his face. Behind them, the oak tree's leaves rustled gently, as if nature itself was witnessing their promise. Charles's hands shook as he read the legal document delivered to his mansion. The formal language felt cold and impersonal, but its meaning was clear. Marcia was fighting for custody of Jeremiah. He sat back in his leather chair, his jaw clenched with determination. The morning sunlight streaming through his office windows seemed to mock the darkness settling in his chest. "Get me David Thompson on the phone," he told his secretary through the intercom. "Immediately." His finger pressed the button so hard it hurt. Within minutes, his lawyer's voice crackled through the speaker. "Charles, I've just received the filing. We need to talk honestly about this." The concern in David's tone was unmistakable. "I'm not giving him up, David." Charles's voice carried a steel that surprised even himself. "It won't be simple," David warned. "Your history, or lack thereof, with the boy could work against us. The board meetings, your corporate schedule, the media attention. Marcia's lawyers will use all of it." Each point felt like a blow to Charles's gut. Charles pulled out Lila's letters from his desk drawer, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the envelopes. "I have these, and photos of his new room, his artwork. He's thriving here." The evidence of their growing bond was everywhere in the house. A small creak from the doorway caught his attention. Jeremiah stood there, his face pale, clearly having heard enough to understand. His hands were twisted in the hem of his t-shirt. "Are they going to take me away?" Charles muted the call. "Come here, son." He opened his arms, inviting but not demanding. Jeremiah approached cautiously, his shoulders hunched. "I heard you talking about court, about Aunt Marcia wanting me." His voice trembled slightly. "Are you—" Jeremiah's voice cracked. "Are you really going to fight for me?" His eyes searched Charles's face for any sign of hesitation. Charles reached out, placing his hands on Jeremiah's shoulders. With everything I have." He squeezed gently, trying to transfer all his certainty through that touch. Later that afternoon, Charles spread documents across his desk. School enrollment papers, medical records, everything he'd need to prove he could provide a stable home. His lawyer's warnings echoed in his mind, but each time he looked at Jeremiah's drawings hanging on the wall, his resolve strengthened. The colorful artwork seemed to breathe life into the traditionally austere office. "I'm sorry for causing so much trouble," Jeremiah said quietly from where he sat on the office couch, sketching half-heartedly. His pencil moved listlessly across the paper. "You're not causing trouble," Charles replied firmly. "You've brought more life to this house in a few weeks than I've seen in years." He meant every word. That evening, they sat by the crackling fireplace. The flames cast warm shadows across their faces as Charles turned to Jeremiah. The boy had pulled his knees to his chest, making himself small. "I want you to know something," he said softly. "I will do everything I can to keep you safe. You're my son, and that will never change." The words felt like a vow. Jeremiah looked uncertain but managed a small nod, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. His fingers relaxed their grip on his knees, just slightly. Jeremiah sat at his new desk, tapping his pencil against the blank paper before him. Sunlight streamed through the window, warming his face as he thought about what to write. The judge needed to understand why staying with Charles mattered so much. His stomach felt tight with worry. What if he couldn't find the right words? Taking a deep breath, he began, "Dear Judge Morrison." He crumpled the paper immediately, too formal. His hand was shaking slightly as he pulled out a fresh sheet. Starting over, he wrote, "My name is Jeremiah, and I want to tell you about Charles Whitaker." The words started flowing then, messy but honest. "When my mom got sick, she told me Charles would help me if I ever needed it. I didn't understand why she was so sure, but now I do. He gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. He bought me art supplies and takes me to museums. He makes sure I eat 3 meals a day and have warm clothes. He even learned how to make my favorite sandwich the way Mom used to make it." Jeremiah paused, wiping his eyes with his sleeve, remembering how Charles had practiced getting the peanut butter to jelly ratio just right. He started a new paragraph, his handwriting becoming steadier. "Mom always said Charles had a good heart, even though things didn't work out between them. She was right. He's trying really hard to be a good dad, and I think he is one. He helps me with my homework and comes to all my art classes." Another false start. Another crumpled paper joined the growing pile by his feet. The words had to be perfect. This was too important to mess up. Finally, after what felt like hours, Jeremiah finished a version that felt right. His fingers were smudged with pencil lead as he read it over carefully. "Dear Judge Morrison, I want to stay with Charles because he makes me feel safe. Before I found him, I was scared all the time. The foster home wasn't good. I ran away because I remembered what Mom said about Charles helping me if I needed it. Charles is teaching me that it's okay to trust people again. He hangs my drawings on the wall and asks about my day. He makes sure I have everything I need, just like Mom wanted for me. Sometimes we talk about her together and it helps me remember the good times. I know some people think Charles shouldn't be my dad because we look different or because he wasn't there before. But Mom believed in him and now I do too. Please let me stay with him. He's the only family I have left. Sincerely, Jeremiah." His hands trembled as he carried the letter downstairs to Charles's study, careful not to wrinkle the paper. "I wrote something," he said quietly, hovering in the doorway. "For the judge." Charles took the letter, his eyes moving across. The courtroom's heavy wooden doors creaked as Charles and Jeremiah entered. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Jeremiah's small hand gripped his sketchbook tightly as they made their way to their seats. Marcia sat across the aisle, her chin held high. Her lawyer, a sharp-featured woman in a crisp suit, arranged papers methodically on the table before them. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Morrison entered. Once everyone was seated, Marcia's lawyer approached the podium. Her voice rang clear and cutting through the quiet courtroom. "Mr. Whitaker abandoned Ms. Thompson when she needed him most. He chose wealth and status over love, leaving her to raise their child alone." Jeremiah shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Charles fought to keep his expression neutral, though his jaw tightened at each accusation. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, Mr. Whitaker's demanding corporate schedule leaves little time for proper childcare. His sudden interest in Jeremiah appears motivated by guilt rather than genuine paternal concern. Marcia took the stand next, her testimony filled with emotion. After Lila died, I tried my best to help, she said, dabbing at her eyes. I may not have much money, but I have love and family ties. That's what Jeremiah needs, not some stranger trying to buy his way into fatherhood. Charles felt Jeremiah trembling beside him. The boy's fingers worked nervously at the corners of his sketchbook. Will we lose? Jeremiah whispered, his voice barely audible. Charles leaned down slightly. We'll tell our truth, he murmured back. That's all we can do. The judge peered over his glasses. Ms. Reed, what specific provisions can you make for Jeremiah's education and future? I work 2 jobs, Marcia replied. It's not much, but I'd make it work. He belongs with family who understands him. And Mr. Whitaker, the judge turned to Charles, how would you balance your corporate responsibilities with raising a child? Before Charles could answer, Judge Morrison raised his hand. We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we return, we'll hear from Mr. Whitaker. Jeremiah looked up at Charles, his eyes wide with worry. The courtroom began to empty, but they remained seated, drawing strength from each other's presence. Charles stood in the witness box, his hands steady on the wooden rail. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the courtroom windows, highlighting the silver in his hair. Tiny dust motes danced in the golden beams, catching the light like suspended glitter. He took a deep breath and began to speak, shoulders squared with determination. Your Honor, I want to start by acknowledging my failures, Charles said, his voice clear and unwavering. 20 years ago, I chose pride and status over love. I abandoned Lila Thompson when she needed me most, and I failed to be there for my son. Those choices have haunted me every single day since. He pulled out Lila's letters from a manila envelope, his fingers gentle as they handled the worn paper. These letters show how much Lila wanted Jeremiah to find me, not for revenge or guilt, but because she believed in me even after everything I'd done. Her faith in me was unshakable even when I didn't deserve it. Jeremiah sat in the front row, clutching his sketchbook so tightly his knuckles turned white. Tears welled in his eyes as Charles continued, and his social worker placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Since Jeremiah came into my life, I've learned what truly matters. I've transformed my home into a place where he can pursue his artistic talents, a sanctuary for his creativity. I've adjusted my work schedule to be present for him, something I should have done years ago. Every day I strive to be the father that Lila knew I could be, the father Jeremiah deserves. Charles detailed the art supplies he'd bought, the museum visits they'd shared, and the room he'd created for Jeremiah, complete with an easel by the window. His voice grew softer, thick with emotion, when he described their visit to Lila's grave, where they'd left fresh flowers and one of Jeremiah's drawings. I can't change the past, Charles said, looking directly at Jeremiah, his eyes glistening. But I can promise a future filled with love, support, and understanding. I'm doing this for you, son, and for the memory of your mother who never lost faith in either of us. Jeremiah wiped his eyes with his sleeve, overwhelmed by Charles's words. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of Charles's testimony hanging in the air like a prayer. The judge adjusted her glasses and spoke, her expression thoughtful. We'll review all evidence presented today and reconvene tomorrow morning for the final decision. As they walked out of the courtroom, Jeremiah wrapped his arms around Charles's waist, pressing close as if afraid to let go. Thank you for fighting for me, he whispered, his voice muffled against Charles's suit jacket. Charles held him tight, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it together. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Henderson settled into her chair, adjusting her reading glasses with deliberate care. Charles felt Jeremiah's small hand slip into his, trembling slightly. The boy's palm was warm and damp with nervous sweat. Across the aisle, Marcia sat with perfect posture, her expression carefully controlled, though her fingers kept smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, Judge Henderson began, her voice clear and measured, carrying through the hushed room. I want to acknowledge both parties' dedication to Jeremiah's well-being. She turned to Marcia first, her eyes kind but firm. Ms. Reed, your concern for your nephew is commendable. You've shown great love for him and a desire to honor your sister's memory. Marcia nodded slightly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white with tension. However, the judge continued, adjusting her papers with practiced movements, I must also recognize the significant changes Mr. Whitaker has made in his life since Jeremiah arrived. She picked up a piece of paper from her desk, the corners slightly worn from repeated handling. I'd like to read from Jeremiah's letter. Jeremiah squeezed Charles's hand harder, pressing close to his side as the judge began reading. Since coming to live with Charles, I feel safe for the first time since Mom died. He gave me a room filled with art supplies, just like Mom always wanted for me. He listens when I talk about her, and he takes me to museums. I know he's sorry for leaving Mom, but he's trying really hard to make things right. Charles felt tears prick at his eyes as the judge set down the letter, the paper making a soft whisper against the wooden desk. Taking all factors into consideration, Judge Henderson announced, her gaze sweeping the courtroom, I hereby grant custody of Jeremiah Whitaker to Charles Whitaker, with provisions for regular visitation rights for Ms. Reed. Relief flooded through Charles as Jeremiah's grip on his hand tightened. A small sob escaped the boy's throat. Marcia stood up slowly, her face tight with emotion, lips pressed into a thin line. She walked over to Charles, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't let him down like you did before. Charles met her gaze and nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of her words and the years of pain behind them. Outside the courtroom, Jeremiah threw his arms around Charles's waist, his whole body shaking with joy. We did it, he said, his voice muffled against Charles's suit jacket. Charles hugged him back, his voice thick with emotion as he rested his chin on top of Jeremiah's curly head. No, you did it, Jeremiah. You gave me a reason to fight. Charles stared at the tabloid headlines spread across his breakfast table, each one more sensational than the last. Whitaker's secret son, PR stunt or guilt, screamed one. Business tycoon's hidden agenda, blared another. Race scandal rocks Whitaker empire, declared a third in bold red letters. He pushed the papers aside, his coffee growing cold and forgotten, his stomach churning at the cruel speculation. Outside, camera flashes lit up the morning like lightning bugs. Reporters had been camping there for days, their vans creating a small village at the mansion's gates. Every time Jeremiah peeked through the curtains, their cameras clicked frantically, and voices called out questions that made the boy flinch and retreat deeper into the house. Mr. Whitaker, his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, sounding strained. The board chairman is on line 1, again. He says it's urgent this time. Charles sighed heavily, watching Jeremiah hurry past the windows with his head down, clutching his sketchbook like a shield. The boy had barely left his room lately, and when he did, he moved like a shadow, trying to make himself invisible. His shoulders hunched forward as if carrying an invisible weight. Tell them I'll call back, Charles replied, his jaw set firmly. Family comes first. That evening, he found Jeremiah sitting on his bed, surrounded by half-finished drawings. Scattered sketches showed dark figures hiding from pointing fingers and harsh lights. The boy looked up with worried eyes, his fingers nervously creasing the corner of his latest drawing. Maybe if I went away for a while, Jeremiah started, his voice small and trembling, until things calmed down. I don't want to cause trouble. No, Charles cut him off firmly, sitting beside him on the bed. You're my son. You belong here. We face this together. The next morning, Charles called his PR team, his voice leaving no room for argument. Set up a press conference, he instructed. It's time to address this head-on. Today. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as Charles approached the podium. Camera lights flashed like strobe lights, and reporters leaned forward eagerly, their recorders held high. The air felt electric with tension. Charles cleared his throat, looking directly into the cameras, his hands steady on the podium. "I've heard the speculation about my relationship with Jeremiah," he began, his voice clear and unwavering. "Some question my motives. Others suggest it's all for show. Let me be clear. Jeremiah is my son. I failed his mother years ago because I was too weak to stand up to prejudice. I won't fail him now. Not ever again." His voice grew stronger as he continued, emotion making it deeper. "I'm proud to be Jeremiah's father. He's taught me more about love, courage, and integrity in these few months than I learned in all my years of business. I won't apologize for taking responsibility for my past mistakes, and I won't apologize for loving my son. Anyone who has a problem with that can deal with me directly." The room erupted with questions, microphones thrust forward like weapons, but Charles held up his hand, steel in his gaze. "That's all I have to say. My family is not up for debate. Not now, not ever." Later that evening, Jeremiah stood in Charles's study doorway, shifting from foot to foot, his eyes red-rimmed but bright. "You didn't have to do that for me," he said quietly, twisting the hem of his shirt. "Face all those people, I mean." Charles turned to his son, his expression soft but determined, love evident in every line of his face. "I'll always stand up for you, no matter what it takes. That's what fathers do." The community center's faded sign hung crookedly above the entrance. Charles watched as Jeremiah ran his fingers along the weathered brick walls, his eyes distant with memories. "Mom used to teach art classes here every Saturday," Jeremiah said softly. "Even when we barely had enough money for supplies, she'd find a way to help other kids learn to draw." Inside, the walls were decorated with old children's artwork, some of the papers yellow with age. Sunlight filtered through cracked windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. Jeremiah pointed to a corner where easels once stood. "She believed everyone deserved a chance to create," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "Even when people told her it was a waste of time?" Charles stood quietly, taking in the peeling paint and worn floors. He felt a mix of pride and sadness as he watched Jeremiah share stories about Lila's dedication to helping others. "What if we could continue her work?" Charles asked suddenly. "A scholarship program in her name, for young artists who need support." Jeremiah's eyes lit up. "Really?" Over the next few days, they worked together at Charles's desk, sketching ideas for the program's logo. Jeremiah's artistic talent shone through as he designed a simple but elegant emblem incorporating his mother's favorite flowers. Charles marveled at his son's creativity and dedication. Charles met with community leaders, securing partnerships and additional funding. The local art council pledged their support, and several businesses offered to match Charles's initial investment. At the announcement event, the community center's main hall was transformed. Fresh paint brightened the walls, and new artwork hung everywhere. Charles stood at the podium, Jeremiah beside him, as he unveiled the Lila Whitaker Scholarship for Young Artists. Lila Thompson was a woman of extraordinary strength and vision, Charles began, his voice steady. She understood that art isn't just about creating beauty, it's about giving voice to those who need to be heard. This scholarship continues her legacy of opening doors for young artists who might otherwise never get the chance to pursue their dreams. Jeremiah beamed as Charles spoke, pride evident in his stance. When reporters asked questions, he confidently explained his role in designing the program's materials. After the speeches ended and the crowd began to disperse, Jeremiah turned to Charles. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for remembering Mom this way." Charles placed a hand on his son's shoulder, feeling a deep connection and warmth. "It's the least I could do for her, and for you." The morning sun cast long shadows across the community center's parking lot as Charles and Jeremiah stepped out of their car. Several neighborhood kids pressed their faces against a chain-link fence nearby, whispering and pointing as contractors carried in their equipment. The old brick building had seen better days, with its weather-worn facade and crumbling steps, but Charles saw beyond its current state to what it could become. "What do you think about putting the art studio here?" Charles asked, gesturing to a large room with natural light streaming through dusty windows. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips, but the space held promise. Jeremiah nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out his sketchbook from his worn backpack. "We could have easels lined up against these windows," Jeremiah said, quickly sketching the layout, his pencil moving with practiced confidence. "And maybe storage cubbies for everyone's supplies along this wall. Each kid could decorate their own space." Charles smiled, watching his son's confident strokes across the paper, reminded of how Lila used to sketch her dreams the same way. "What about that big empty wall in the main room?" Jeremiah's eyes lit up with the spark of creativity that Charles had come to cherish. "I've been thinking about that. What if we painted a mural? Something that shows how art brings people together." He flipped to a fresh page and began sketching his vision, hands of different colors reaching toward a central point, surrounded by swirling patterns and symbols of hope. His excitement made the pencil dance across the paper. As they walked through the building with the contractors, not everyone shared their enthusiasm. Mrs. Johnson, a longtime resident with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, stood with her arms crossed near the entrance, her disapproval evident in every line of her face. "This all seems very convenient," she said loudly, her voice echoing in the empty space. "Rich man swoops in to save the neighborhood. Great publicity stunt." Charles took a deep breath before responding, remembering his own journey to this moment. "I understand your skepticism, Mrs. Johnson, but this isn't about publicity. This is about honoring Lila Thompson's legacy and giving kids the same opportunities she gave Jeremiah. Every child deserves a chance to create." Throughout the morning, Jeremiah worked on refining his mural design, while contractors took measurements and discussed timeline estimates. His excitement was contagious, even winning over some of the skeptical onlookers as he explained his ideas, his hands moving animatedly as he described his vision for the space. Workers began clearing out old furniture and debris, marking the first tangible steps toward transformation. The hollow sounds of their work echoed through the building, mixing with the scratch of Jeremiah's pencil as he continued sketching, lost in his own world of possibility. As they prepared to leave, Jeremiah paused at the entrance, looking back at the activity inside. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams streaming through the windows. "This is going to make a difference, isn't it?" he asked softly, hope threading through his words. Charles placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of the moment. "It already has, Jeremiah. It already has." The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Charles adjusted his bow tie as he entered, nodding at familiar faces while steeling himself for the evening ahead. The usual symphony of classical music and practiced laughter filled the air, but tonight it felt different. He could feel the weight of curious stares following his every move. "Charles, darling." Margaret Wellington, a longtime board member's wife, approached with an overly bright smile. "We've been hearing the most interesting things about your recent projects." "Yes," Charles replied evenly. "The community center renovation is coming along wonderfully." "Oh, that's not quite what I meant." Margaret lowered her voice. "About the boy?" "My son," Charles corrected firmly. "His name is Jeremiah." Throughout the evening, similar conversations played out. During dinner, Richard Blackwood, a fellow CEO, leaned across the table. "Charles, surely there are more suitable charitable endeavors. The country club's annual fund. The community center will serve hundreds of children who need a safe space to develop their talents," Charles interrupted. "Just like my son Jeremiah, who's already showing remarkable artistic ability." "But the publicity, Charles," another guest chimed in. "Surely you see how this looks." Charles set down his wineglass. "Actually, I do. It looks like I'm finally doing something meaningful with my wealth. Something Lila," his voice caught slightly, "would have been proud of." The name dropped like a stone in the elegant setting. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Later, near the dessert table, Elizabeth Chen, a prominent philanthropist, pulled Charles aside. "I've been following your community center project," she said. "I'd love to discuss a possible partnership. The arts program you're developing sounds promising." Charles felt a small surge of relief. "Thank you. It means a lot to have support for this initiative. As the evening progressed, Charles found himself growing more direct with his responses to criticism. When James Patterson suggested the whole thing was a publicity stunt, Charles looked him straight in the eye. "Jeremiah has taught me more about courage and integrity in these few months than I've learned in 50 years of business," he said firmly. "If anyone wants to question my motives, they're welcome to visit the center and see for themselves what we're building." By the end of the night, Charles needed air. He stepped onto the balcony, loosening his bow tie as he gazed at the city lights below. "You're worth it, Jeremiah," he whispered to himself, "and so is this." The morning sun cast long shadows across the community center's parking lot as Charles and Jeremiah arrived to check on the renovation progress. Workers bustled about with tools and materials, the sound of construction filling the air with promise. The rhythmic pounding of hammers and whir of power tools echoed through the space. Jeremiah clutched his sketchbook, eager to see how his design ideas were coming to life, his fingers drumming excitedly against the worn cover. But their excitement vanished the moment they rounded the corner. Harsh black letters sprawled across the freshly painted walls, spelling out words of hate that made Charles's stomach turn. The ugly graffiti stood in stark contrast to the clean white paint they'd chosen just days before. Jeremiah stopped dead in his tracks, his sketchbook slipping from his fingers and landing with a soft thud on the concrete. "I'll call the police," Charles said quickly, pulling out his phone. His hands shook as he dialed, watching Jeremiah's face crumple, the boy's usual quiet confidence cracking like thin ice. "This is my fault," Jeremiah whispered, backing away from the wall, his shoulders hunched inward protectively. "They did this because of me." Charles ended the call and knelt beside his son, gravel crunching under his knees. "Listen to me, Jeremiah. None of this is your fault. These people, they're like my father was, small-minded and afraid of change. They're stuck in the past while we're building the future." Jeremiah wouldn't meet his eyes, his gaze fixed on his scuffed sneakers. "Maybe we should stop. Just leave it alone." "No," Charles said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of years of regret and newfound determination. "I spent years letting my father's prejudices control my choices. It cost me your mother, and it almost cost me you. I won't make that mistake again." He walked to his car and returned with cleaning supplies, buckets sloshing with soapy water. "We're going to clean this up, together." As they worked, neighbors began stopping by. An elderly woman brought water bottles and words of encouragement. A group of teenagers grabbed brushes and joined in, their chatter filling the heavy silence. Soon, a dozen people were scrubbing alongside them, the community rallying in a way Charles had never expected. "See?" Charles said softly to Jeremiah, gesturing to the growing crowd of helpers. "This is what our community really looks like. This is who we are." That evening, as the cleaned walls dried in the setting sun, Jeremiah pulled out his sketchbook. His pencil moved with purpose across the paper, drawing hands of different shades reaching upward together, each one unique but united in their upward reach. Charles watched as the design took shape, hope rising in his chest like a tide, washing away the bitter taste of the morning's discovery. "It's beautiful," Charles said, his voice thick with emotion. Jeremiah nodded, adding final touches to his sketch, his confidence returning with each careful stroke. "They tried to spread hate," he said quietly, his voice stronger now. "We'll answer with unity. That's what Mom would have wanted." The fireplace cast a warm glow across the living room as Charles and Jeremiah sat together on the plush carpet, surrounded by sketches and colored pencils. The dancing flames created shifting shadows that seemed to bring their artwork to life. Jeremiah's new mural design lay spread before them, full of vibrant colors and intertwined hands reaching upward, each one unique in shape and size, but united in their upward journey. "What do you think?" Jeremiah asked softly, his fingers tracing the edges of his sketch. His shoulders hunched slightly, betraying his nervousness. "It's beautiful," Charles replied, studying the intricate details. "You have an amazing gift, just like your mother." He smiled, remembering Lila's own artistic touch. Jeremiah's shoulders tensed. My foster family, they said art was a waste of time. They never let me draw, said I should focus on more practical things. His voice quivered, and he wrapped his arms around himself. Sometimes I wonder if they were right. If you'll decide the same thing. Charles set down the sketch and turned to face his son, his heart aching at the fear in the boy's voice. I made a terrible mistake with your mother, Jeremiah. I let fear and pride control my choices. I walked away when she needed me most. He took a deep breath, the weight of past regrets heavy in his chest. But I promise you, I will never abandon you like that. Never. Reaching into an old leather portfolio, its corners worn smooth from years of handling, Charles pulled out some yellowed papers. Look at these, he said, spreading out rough sketches from his youth. I used to love drawing too. But my father, he said it wasn't proper for someone of our status. The memory still stung after all these years. Jeremiah's eyes widened as he examined the drawings, his fingers gentle against the fragile paper. These are really good. Why did you stop? Because I was afraid, Charles admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Just like I was afraid to stand up for your mother. But you're teaching me to be brave again. Together they began refining the mural design, with Charles suggesting subtle changes while encouraging Jeremiah to trust his instincts. The boy's confidence grew with each stroke of his pencil. Do you really think this will make any difference? Jeremiah asked, pausing with his pencil hovering over the paper. After what those people did? Your mother never gave up, even when things seemed impossible, Charles said, his voice warm with admiration. She taught art to neighborhood kids, using supplies she could barely afford. She believed that even small acts of kindness could change lives. He watched as Jeremiah absorbed these words about the mother he'd lost too soon. As they put the finishing touches on the design, Jeremiah looked up at Charles, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I love you, Dad. Charles felt his heart swell, and he pulled Jeremiah close, breathing in the scent of his son's hair. I love you too, son. The afternoon sun streamed through the newly installed windows of the community center, casting warm patches of light across the freshly painted floors. Workers moved purposefully through the halls, hanging banners and arranging furniture, while volunteers carefully positioned potted plants and artwork along the corridors. At the heart of the activity stood Jeremiah, balanced on a scaffold, his brush making deliberate strokes on the massive mural that dominated the main wall. The design had come alive over the past weeks. Dozens of hands of different sizes and colors reached upward toward a brilliant sky, each one unique yet part of a greater whole. Looking good up there, Charles called from below, clipboard in hand as he checked off items from his preparation list. Jeremiah grinned, adding subtle highlights to one of the reaching fingers. Mrs. Johnson, an elderly neighbor who'd known Lila, stopped to admire the mural. My word, she breathed. It's absolutely beautiful, child. Your mama would be so proud. Jeremiah blushed but kept working, his brush steady and sure. A small crowd gathered as he added the final touches, and when he stepped back from the last stroke, spontaneous applause broke out. Jeremiah climbed down from the scaffold, ducking his head shyly at the attention. You've got a real gift, said Mr. Rodriguez, the local grocery store owner. This is exactly what our community needed. Charles watched proudly as Jeremiah thanked everyone, handling the praise with grace. In another room, volunteers were setting up an exhibition space where Jeremiah's other artwork would be displayed during tomorrow's opening. His sketches of the mansion, portraits of Charles, and studies of the neighborhood showed remarkable skill and sensitivity. The press confirmed their coming, an assistant told Charles, handing him an updated guest list, and the mayor's office called to reconfirm her attendance. Charles nodded, but his attention was fixed on Jeremiah, who was carefully arranging his portfolio pieces with the help of some neighborhood kids. The boy who'd shown up trembling at his door on Christmas Eve had blossomed into a confident young artist. As the day wound down and the sun began to set, the volunteers and workers filed out, leaving father and son alone in front of the magnificent mural. The last rays of sunlight caught the colors, making them seem to glow from within. "This is just the beginning, Jeremiah," Charles said softly. Jeremiah looked up at their creation, a gentle smile playing across his face. "It feels like home," he replied. The evening cast long shadows across the mansion's entrance as the doorbell rang. Charles opened the door to find Marcia standing there, her usual fierce expression replaced by something softer, more uncertain. Jeremiah peeked out from behind Charles, his hand gripping the doorframe, his dark eyes wide with apprehension. "May I come in?" Marcia asked quietly, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. Charles nodded, stepping aside to let her enter, noticing how she hugged herself as if seeking comfort. In the warmly lit living room, Marcia sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The golden glow from the table lamps softened her features, making her look more like the sister Lila had always described. "I saw the community center today," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "The mural. It's exactly what Lila would have done. All those colors, all that hope." Charles sat across from her while Jeremiah remained standing, watching carefully from his spot near the fireplace. Marcia took a deep breath before continuing, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "I was wrong about you, Charles. I let my anger and grief cloud my judgment. After Lila died, I felt so guilty for not being there more, for not helping when they needed it." Tears welled in her eyes, catching the lamplight. "I thought fighting for custody was the only way to make up for that. I was so sure I knew what was best." Charles leaned forward, his expression gentle. "I understand, Marcia. I failed Lila too. But we can't change the past. We can only do better now. That's what I'm trying to do every day. The way you've stepped up for Jeremiah, the changes you've made in the community." Marcia turned to Jeremiah, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry if I scared you, baby. I never wanted to hurt you. I just needed to know you were safe and loved." Jeremiah moved closer, his shoulders relaxing as he recognized the aunt he remembered from happier times. "I know, Aunt Marcia. That mural you painted," she smiled through her tears, reaching out to him. "Lila would have been so proud. She always said you had her artist's heart. Every time I look at it, I see her in your work." They spent the next hour sharing memories of Lila, their laughter and tears mingling in the warm evening light. The community center buzzed with excitement as people gathered for the grand opening. Colorful balloons danced in the warm summer breeze, and welcome banners fluttered against the bright blue sky. Jeremiah's mural, now complete, drew gasps of admiration from the growing crowd. Children pointed and whispered, their eyes wide with wonder at the bold strokes and vivid colors that transformed the once plain wall. Charles stepped onto the makeshift stage, adjusting his microphone with slightly trembling hands. His heart pounded as he began to speak. "A few months ago, I was a different man, lost, alone, trapped in a prison of my own making." He paused, his eyes finding Jeremiah in the crowd, drawing strength from the boy's encouraging smile. Then a brave young boy showed up at my door, carrying his mother's hope and his own incredible spirit. In the audience, Marcia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as Charles continued, her earlier doubts about him long forgotten. "Lila Thompson was the strongest person I ever knew. She faced every challenge with grace and kindness, even when the world turned its back on her. This center and the scholarship program we're launching today honors her memory and her belief that art can heal and unite us all." When Jeremiah took the stage, his voice was quiet but steady, just like his mother's had been. "My mom always said that kindness is like art. It makes the world more beautiful." He gestured toward the mural behind him, his hand steady and sure. "This mural is for her, and for all of us. It shows what we can build together when we open our hearts." The crowd erupted in enthusiastic applause as the mural was officially unveiled. Children pressed forward to see the vibrant details up close, pointing excitedly at the intertwined hands reaching toward the sky, each one painted in different shades representing the diversity of their community. Parents and community leaders toured the renovated spaces, admiring the new art rooms stocked with brushes, paints, and easels, and the welcoming library corners filled with books about art and inspiration. Charles announced the details of the Lila Whitaker Scholarship, explaining how it would support young artists who shared Lila's passion and vision for bringing people together through art. His voice swelled with pride as he described the opportunities it would create. Meanwhile, Jeremiah proudly showed visitors his art exhibit, his face glowing as people praised his work and asked questions about his creative process. Reporters moved through the crowd, capturing the moment for local news. Their cameras focused on the transformed building, the eager families, and the powerful image of Charles and Jeremiah working together to build something meaningful. The story of their unlikely bond and shared mission touched hearts throughout the community. As the celebration began to wind down, Charles and Jeremiah found themselves standing before the mural, taking in its beauty and significance. Marcia joined them quietly, slipping her arms around both their shoulders, and the three stood together united by Lila's memory and the promise of a better future. The setting sun cast a golden glow on the mural, making the colors shine even brighter, just like the hope in their hearts. The community center hummed with life on a sunny afternoon. Children's laughter echoed through the hallways as paint-splattered hands created colorful masterpieces in the art rooms. The scent of tempera paint and fresh paper filled the air while volunteers moved between tables, offering guidance and encouragement. In one corner, Jeremiah sat surrounded by a group of eager young artists, his gentle presence drawing them in like moths to a flame. "Remember, it's okay if it's not perfect," Jeremiah said softly to a frustrated little girl with pigtails and paint on her cheek. "Sometimes the best art comes from mistakes. That's what my mom always told me." He demonstrated a simple shading technique, and the girl's face lit up as she tried it herself, her earlier frustration melting away. Charles paused in the doorway, watching his son with pride. Gone was the scared, withdrawn boy who had shown up at his mansion that snowy Christmas Eve, seeking shelter and hope. In his place stood a confident young teacher, sharing his love of art with others just as Lila would have wanted. "Look what I drew, Mr. Jeremiah." A small boy with missing front teeth held up a wobbly sketch of his family, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "That's wonderful, Tommy. I love how you captured their smiles, especially your little sisters. You can tell how happy they are," Jeremiah praised, making the boy beam with pride and clutch his drawing closer. In the main hall, Charles met with potential donors, discussing ways to ensure the center's future. The old building had come alive with new purpose, and he was determined to keep it thriving. He couldn't help but smile when he caught glimpses of Jeremiah's newest painting hanging prominently on the wall, a stunning portrait of Lila surrounded by rays of golden light, her kind eyes seeming to watch over everyone who passed. Marcia arrived for her regular volunteer shift, her arms full of new books. She exchanged warm greetings with Charles before heading to help with the afternoon reading program. Their shared commitment to Jeremiah and the center had transformed their relationship from adversaries to family, healing old wounds with each passing day. As the day wound down, Charles and Jeremiah sat together on the front steps, sharing a peaceful moment. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the neighborhood streets where children played basketball and rode their bikes. Jeremiah leaned against Charles's shoulder, contentment clear in his voice. "We've made something special here. Mom would have loved this." Charles wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders, feeling blessed beyond measure. "No, you've made something special, Jeremiah. I just followed your lead. You and your mother showed me the way." Snowflakes drifted lazily through the evening air as Charles and Jeremiah stood outside the community center. Their breaths formed small clouds in the crisp winter night while they worked on the final touches of their newest mural. The massive artwork stretched across the building's side wall, impossible to miss, its colors vivid, even in the fading light. Lila's gentle smile beamed down from the center of the mural, her eyes kind and knowing, capturing the warmth she'd always radiated. Around her portrait, vibrant colors swirled into meaningful symbols, a paintbrush representing creativity, joined hands showing unity, and soaring doves embodying hope. The artwork combined Jeremiah's bold style with Charles's eye for detail, creating something uniquely beautiful that spoke to both their talents. "Dad?" Jeremiah paused, paintbrush hovering over the wall, his voice soft but steady. "What do you think Mom would say if she could see us now?" Charles stepped back from the mural, his eyes glistening slightly as he studied their creation. "She'd say we finally got it right," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Jeremiah nodded, adding a final stroke of paint to complete a dove's wing. Several people walking by stopped to admire their work, offering words of thanks and appreciation. The growing crowd drew others from nearby shops and homes. "This center has changed our neighborhood," said an elderly woman, her mittened hands clasped together, eyes bright with memories. "And this mural? It captures Lila's spirit perfectly. She always wanted to make beautiful things for everyone to enjoy." Pride swelled in Jeremiah's chest as he listened to stories about his mother. More neighbors gathered, sharing memories of Lila's kindness and her impact on the community. Some recalled how she'd taught art classes from her tiny apartment. Others mentioned her volunteer work with local children. Each story painted a picture of a woman whose love had touched countless lives. Charles wrapped an arm around Jeremiah's shoulders as they stepped back to view their completed work. The mural seemed to glow in the early evening light, Lila's smile watching over the neighborhood she'd loved so much. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting a gentle glow across their masterpiece. "Ready to head home?" Charles asked softly, giving his son's shoulder a gentle squeeze. Jeremiah nodded, slipping his hand into his father's. They walked away from the community center together, leaving behind windows that glowed warmly against the falling snow, filled with the sounds of laughter and life. Their footprints marked a path through the fresh powder side by side, father and son united in their tribute to the woman who had brought them together. If you enjoyed the story of Charles, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.